Chapter 39. The Miracle. A Recommendation Letter, 1990 to 1991. During my 10 years with Shanghai's municipal government, I formed friendships with many renowned writers, including Zhao Lihong. Zhao, 5 or 6 years my senior, was a professional writer affiliated with the Shanghai Writers Association and worked as an editor for the literary Sprout magazine. He later rose to vice chairman of the Shanghai Writers Association and president of the Shanghai Literature Publishing House, establishing himself as a prominent literary figure in China. Our first conversation occurred when he visited my office to arrange accommodations for a distinguished scholar from Beijing. We instantly connected, discovering our mutual passion for literature. As time passed, we grew closer, sharing a bond like kindred spirits. I even had the chance to visit his home. Therefore, he seemed taken aback when he discovered I was planning to study in the U.S. However, after I shared my motivations, he fell quiet. After a lengthy silence, he inquired,
"Do you require a recommendation letter?"
Before I could respond, he added,
"In fact, I have a good rapport with Professor Xu Zhongyu, the head of the Chinese department at East China Normal University. If you need an academic reference, I could facilitate an introduction to him."
I was amazed. Professor Xu Zhongyu was a literary legend. He was one of China's most esteemed scholars and the chairman of the Shanghai Writers Association. I had admired his essays for years. Zhou recalled my literature degree obtained through ECNU's self-study program, which he viewed as an ideal link. Curiously, he was also a graduate of the Chinese department at ECNU, emerging from the renowned 1977 class, the first to be admitted after the Cultural Revolution. I hesitated for a moment. At that point, I had received acceptance letters from several U.S. universities. A recommendation letter wouldn't help my visa application, as I didn't need it. But how could I decline my friend's sincere offer? How could I miss meeting one of China's most esteemed literary figures? I decided to accept Zhao's invitation. A few days afterward, Zhao reached out to me again.
"I spoke to Professor Xu. He's happy to write you a recommendation letter. He'll be at a meeting at the Shanghai Writers Association in a few days. You can meet him there."
The deal was finalized. I knew the location well and had prepared the recommendation letter for him to sign. When I arrived, the meeting was almost finished. After the session concluded, I approached Professor Xu to introduce myself. Mr. Xu, with his full head of silver hair, exuded energy. His face was friendly and inviting, with eyes that conveyed deep intelligence. He immediately praised my decision to pursue further studies in the U.S., calling it a great step forward. I handed him my business card. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his own, and exchanged it with me.
"So what can I do for you?"
he asked. I presented the pre-written recommendation letter. He took his time reading through every word. When he finished, he looked up and said,
"Very well, I'll sign it now."
And just like that, his signature graced the page. Before we parted, he left me with a few words of encouragement.
"Study hard. Make something of yourself. You will have a great future."
We shook hands, and then he was gone. Reflecting on that meeting, I realized it transcended a simple letter. It represented a pivotal moment, a connection between the past and future, encapsulating the heritage of China's renowned literary figures and the uncertain path of a young man eager to break free. During that period, Xu Zhongyu joined other prominent literary dissidents in Shanghai to protest the party's brutal crackdown on students after June 4th, 1989. Xu's handshake, signature, and simple words weren't just personal approval. They were a nod from history itself, as if to say,
"Go, write your own story."
And so, With his name on this recommendation letter and my future still uncertain, I took one step closer to America. In the 1980s, the idea of studying abroad was enveloped in mystery, representing both a bold adventure and, for the academic elite, the peak of intellectual aspiration. For most Chinese individuals, going overseas seemed unimaginable, a distant dream, as elusive as Columbus embarking on his voyage to discover a new world across the vast ocean. During that era, overseas studies were the sole path to leave China. To attend a university in the United States, one needed to be a graduate. However, even after a decade of post-cultural revolution university admissions, by the late 1980s, university graduates comprised just 1 in 10,000 in China. Among these individuals, only a select few possessed degrees from renowned universities in Beijing and Shanghai qualifications that American institutions would acknowledge. Even within this small group, only a minuscule fraction contemplated pursuing studies overseas. Following this were even more significant challenges: financial sponsorship, political screening, language proficiency, matching academic qualifications. After everything, very few applicants actually reached the visa interview stage. Beyond all these hurdles looming like the immense Himalayas lay the ultimate challenge: the visa. For those who met every requirement, this final choice felt as unpredictable as a lottery draw. Now, it was my moment. From an academic perspective, my visa application was flimsy, a delicate structure of inconsistent credentials and makeshift solutions, barely intact. If I were to be generous, I might liken it to a paper wall hastily assembled with optimism. On December 31st, 1990, the final day of the year, my passport finally arrived after weeks of waiting. However, the U.S. consulate had been closed for several days due to the Christmas and New Year's holidays. My visa interview was scheduled for January 4th, 1991, leaving me just 8 days before my flight to San Francisco on January 12th. Would I be able to secure my visa in time? One thing was clear: I had privileges within China. However, those privileges would hold no value once I entered the U.S. consulate. At this pivotal moment, I felt utterly powerless. I stood facing what seemed like the ultimate judgment of my life. The stakes were clear: either I would find success or face failure. The U.S. consulate in Shanghai was only a 10-minute walk from my home. My old high school classmate, fondly dubbed Longlegs, generously agreed to wait overnight in line for me. That was quite a favor, especially considering the biting winter chill in Shanghai. I arrived at the consulate in the morning on January 4th. The sight outside was intense. Hundreds of hopefuls gathered in a mass, their faces brimming with tension and eager anticipation. This was the ticket counter for the American dream, the destination for Shanghai's brightest and most ambitious, all trying to escape to the land of opportunity. Everyone present shared the same aspiration, yet most had already steeled themselves for disappointment. They had to, because 99% of them would ultimately be denied visas. This was the harsh reality for Chinese applicants at that time. And I was no exception. As I stood in line, my mind went blank. I forced myself to think about nothing. I refused to imagine what would happen if I got rejected. I refused to analyze my chances. I simply let go. It's in God's hands now, I thought. Even though I didn't believe in God. But at that moment, what choice did I have? When you have nothing else, you can only believe. And if you didn't believe, why even stand in line? Because in the end, the only thing that mattered was faith. Finally, it was my turn. I entered the consulate's waiting area, watching as one applicant after another approached the visa counters. One by one, I saw their expressions shift. From nervous hope, to stunned disbelief, to crushed disappointment. Person after person walked away, rejected, their heads hanging low. I saw no one leave smiling. I was next. The consular officer called my number. I stepped forward. It was time. The consular officer was young, perhaps in his mid to late 30s, strikingly handsome, with a neatly trimmed shadow of a beard that framed his face. He barely glanced at me as he flipped through my stack of documents, sifting through them absent-mindedly. Then, without warning, he began chatting with me in Chinese, occasionally switching to English.
"Is this your business card?"
he asked, holding up the one I had submitted. Yes, I nodded. He turned it over in his fingers, studying it with casual interest before asking,
"You have such a good job. Why do you want to go to America?"
The question caught me off guard. Visa interviews weren't supposed to be this personal. I had prepared for questions about my finances, studies, and intent to return to China, but not this one. I want to further my studies to continue my education. It was the standard answer we were all expected to give. He tilted his head slightly, still playing with my business card, still not looking at me.
"You know,"
he said, his voice unhurried,
"if you go to America, you'll never find a job as good as this one."
A strange chill ran down my spine. How does he know my job is a good one? I thought. I hesitated, then asked, "You know about Hengshan Group?" The moment I said it, I felt a prickle of unease. There was something odd about this conversation. The consular officer chuckled, shaking his head as if amused by my question.
"Of course we know about it. It's part of the municipal government."
His tone was casual, matter-of-fact, but something was unsettling about how easily he stated it. They know everything, I realized. Still, I kept my expression composed. It is a good job, I admitted. But I've always had a passion for literature. If I can, I want to further my studies in Western literature. I was waiting, dreading the moment when his fingers would land on my financial documents. The bank statement from the university, the flimsy last-minute workaround I had managed to obtain, seemed to be buried somewhere in that stack of papers. Please, don't ask about financial sponsorship. My heart pounded as I saw his hand hover over it. For a brief moment, his fingertips brushed the edge of the page. I held my breath. But instead of stopping, he flipped right past it. I almost collapsed with relief. Then suddenly, his hand froze. He had found something else. He pulled out a letter. My recommendation letter from Professor Xu.
"You know Xu Zhongyu?"
he asked, looking up for the first time. His gaze was sharp now, filled with genuine curiosity. I straightened. Of course, he was my professor. The consular officer leaned forward slightly.
"Can you introduce me to him?"
For a second, I thought I had misheard him. What? I blinked, stunned. Did he just ask me to introduce him to Professor Xu? I studied his face, searching for any hint of amusement, a joke, perhaps. But no, he was completely serious. Of course, I said, regaining my composure. I'd be happy to introduce you. I said it as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if I were simply back at my office, casually introducing one influential figure to another. Something shifted in the room. The consular officer's expression softened.
"I studied literature too,"
he confided.
"Back in university."
His voice had lost its official edge. Now reminiscing, he spoke as if we were just two literature lovers.
"I admire Professor Xu Zhongyu very much. I've always wanted to meet him, but people always surround him. I can never get close."
He laughed, shaking his head.
"But if you could introduce me, that would be wonderful."
I smiled, reaching into my pocket. Actually, I have his business card. I handed it to him through the glass window. The moment he took it, his face lit up.
"This is fantastic,"
he said, almost giddy with excitement. Then he did something I never expected. He reached into his own drawer, took out a business card, and handed it to me. I glanced at it. John Joe Ng, Vice Consul, U.S. Consulate General, Shanghai. Then, without fanfare, he looked up and said,
"Come pick up your visa on the 8th.
I froze. What? That was it? I had passed? My mind scrambled to keep up with the reality of what had just happened. Was this actually happening? Did I just get my visa? It felt too surreal, like a scripted performance, a carefully orchestrated play, and yet somehow I had made it through the final act. Thank you, I stammered, barely able to contain the flood of emotions rising in my chest. But who was I thank? The consular officer? Professor Xu Zhongyu? Or perhaps for the first time in my life, the United States of America. The consular officer grinned.
In fact, I should be the one thanking you,"
He replied with a light tone.
"for connecting me with Professor Xu."
He dismissed my gratitude with a bright nod, appearing even more enthusiastic than I felt, as though he had been given access to my world instead of me to his. I turned, walking steadily toward the exit. I forced myself to stay calm, to act normal, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. I stepped through the consulate doors, past the hundreds still waiting in line, the hopeful, the desperate, the dreamers. Outside in the cold air of Shanghai's winter, I only exhaled. I had done it. I had my visa. Visa to the USA. I wanted to jump into the air when I stepped out of the consulate. A year and a half of relentless struggle, uncertainty, and blind faith, all condensed into a single moment of triumph. The cold Shanghai air hit my face, but I barely felt it. I was weightless. Waiting outside was Longleg. The moment he saw me, he rushed over, his face full of urgency.
Old Yang, did you get it?
I grinned, suppressing the overwhelming surge of joy inside me. You think I'd come here just to fail? I said, deliberately smug. Even he, a man who could brag about a glass of water like the Yellow River, had not expected me to deliver my most confident boast in the one place where no one dared to bluff. His eyes widened. Then he exploded with energy. Before I could stop him, he was already marching to the consulate gate like a victorious general addressing his troops. With a dramatic wave of his hand, he shouted at the top of his lungs,
Hey, listen up, everybody. We got a visa here. We got a visa here. Who else got their visa today? Nobody? No one? That means you're all out of luck, but us, we got it, just like that.
His voice boomed across the gathered crowd. For a brief second, silence. Then, a commotion. A wave of murmurs swept through the people crammed outside the consulate, a mix of hopefuls and shattered dreamers. Who got the visa? Who was it? Dozens of heads turned, eyes locked onto us. The desperate, the anxious, the ones lined up overnight only to be rejected in minutes. They all swarmed toward us. They needed to know what had happened. How had this man, this random applicant, walked in and walked out with a visa in under an hour? They needed answers. They needed hope. But before they could reach me, I vanished. I slipped away into the crowd, leaving Longleg to bask in his moment of fame. He had already assumed my identity, stepping seamlessly into the role of the visa hero, a storyteller with no script but endless confidence. He didn't know a thing about what had happened inside that consulate. And yet, he was already spinning a grand tale of how we had conquered the U.S. visa process. A magnetic force drew the crowd toward him, eager for every fabricated detail of his supposed expertise. As I made my escape, I heard his voice rising behind me.
You see, the trick is...
I shook my head, half amused, half exasperated. He had no idea what he was talking about, and yet they listened, because at that moment he was living proof that the American dream was still possible, even if he wasn't the one who had actually won it. The entire visa process took less than an hour. When I returned home, Kuling and my other friends and relatives anxiously awaited news. The moment they saw me, they leaped up.
Did you even get inside? Or did you just turn around and come home?
When I told them the truth, that I had already passed, that the visa was secured, they screamed.
That fast? Are you kidding? It's like you just went for groceries at the market.
On January 8th, 1991, I picked up my visa at the U.S. consulate.